Usually, when we think about getting things done, there is this expectation of a direct binary reaction, like driving a car, right?
Right.
You turn the steering wheel to the left, the tires turn to the left, and, well, the car goes left. It's immediate. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's a simple cause and effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you step into the machinery of a modern nation state, suddenly you realize that steering wheel isn't connected to the tires at all. It's connected to this labyrinth of gears, competing drivers, and, an engine room that seems to have a mind entirely of its own.
It really is the ultimate complex system. I mean, you turn the wheel and the car might go left, or it might wait 10 days, or it might ask you to submit a formal request to reconsider if you really want to turn it all.
That is so true. And that labyrinth of gears for our listeners today, that is the executive branch. Today, we are going on a deep dive, cracking open a fascinating chapter literally titled Executive from the textbook Indian Constitution at Work. We really want to figure out who actually holds the levers of power in that massive system.
It's a great source because it goes way beyond the daily political theater, the speeches, the rallies, the headlines. We are extracting the absolute most critical nuggets of knowledge about how the state actually operates on a mechanical level.
Right. We're looking at how the people in power are kept in check, and honestly, the truly surprising ways individuals can stretch their constitutional limits. By the end of this deep dive, you, the listener, will understand why a president is not just like a rubber stamp,
Definitely not.
and why a prime minister often functions more like a high-wire tightrope walker. Yeah. Plus, how an unelected bureaucracy is actually the entity running the day-to-day show you live in. But before we get into the specifics of India, we kind of need to establish a baseline, right?
We do. We need to define what this executive thing actually is because, I mean, the word gets thrown around constantly. You hear about corporate executives, chief executive.
Like, it's everywhere. But in the context of a government, it has a very specific operational meaning.
Yeah.
Let's try to visualize it like this. Imagine the government is a massive computer system. The legislature, so the parliament, they are the programmers.
Okay, I like that.
They sit around debating and writing the code, which are the laws and the policies. But, code on a screen doesn't do anything by itself. The executive branch is the computer's operating system.
Right. They are the ones actually executing the commands, managing the memory, running the hardware, making the software function in the real world. Basically, they handle the administration and management of the country.
Exactly.
And to push that analogy just a bit further, within that operating system, you have two very different components. The source material draws a really sharp line between what is called the political executive and the permanent executive.
Oh, right. So essentially the front end and the back end.
Precisely. So the political executive, that consists of the heads of government and their ministers. These are the people you see on television all the time.
The ones making the big speeches.
Yeah. Yeah. They are saddled with the overall responsibility of government policy. They make the big decisions, but their tenure is temporary. It is entirely tied to the electoral cycle.
Right. They could be voted out.
Exactly. Then you have the permanent executive. These are the civil servants, the administrative machinery. They are responsible for the day-to-day execution of those policies, and they remain in their jobs regardless of which political party actually wins the election.
Okay, so the way different countries structure that political executive part, the ones at the very top, is completely different, though. Why do countries build their operating systems so differently? The textbook lays out a few different global models.
Well, it really comes down to what a country prioritizes. It's usually a balance between stability versus accountability. Broadly speaking, you can look at three main architectures. First, you have the presidential system. The United States and Brazil use this. In this model, the president is both the head of the state, so the symbolic face of the nation, and the head of the government, the actual person turning the wheel. It concentrates an immense amount of power into one single office.
Wow. Okay. Then you have the parliamentary system, right?
Yeah.
Like in Germany or Japan.
Right. And in this system, the head of government is usually a chancellor or a prime minister, and they hold the real effective power alongside their cabinet. But the head of state, which might be a president like in Germany or a monarch like in Japan, is primarily a ceremonial figurehead.
So they split the job in two.
Exactly.
And the third option is like a hybrid, right? The semi-presidential system. Countries like France and Russia use this one.
Yes. You have both a president and a prime minister, but unlike the pure parliamentary system, this president actually possesses significant day-to-day powers. And they might not even belong to the same political party, which creates immediate friction.
I can imagine.
But what's fascinating here is how the source material highlights the 1978 Constitution of Sri Lanka as an extreme example of this semi-presidential system.
Oh, right. The textbook goes into a lot of detail on that.
It does. In their setup, the people directly elect the president. And this president is absolutely not a figurehead. They choose the prime minister. But it goes way further than that. The president has the constitutional power to remove the prime minister or any of the ministers entirely at their own discretion.
Wait, really? They can just fire the prime minister on a whim?
They hold the ultimate trump card. They are the head of state, head of government, and commander-in-chief. And on top of all that, they are given massive constitutional armor.
What do you mean?
To remove a Sri Lankan president, you need a resolution passed by at least 2/3 of the total members of parliament.
2/3. That's huge.
It's massive. Or if you only have half the parliament, the speaker has to be satisfied the allegations have merit, and then it goes to this highly complex inquiry by the Supreme Court. Basically, the system is designed to make the executive incredibly entrenched and stable.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you look at a system like Sri Lanka's, where the president has vast sweeping powers and is nearly impossible to fire, I mean, isn't that exactly the kind of personality cult the makers of the Indian Constitution were utterly terrified of creating?
Oh, absolutely. That fear of the personality cult is precisely what drove India's constitutional choices.
Right.
When the makers of the Indian Constitution were designing their system post-independence, they were highly, highly sensitive to the dangers of unchecked executive power. I mean, they had some experience with parliamentary models under British rule, specifically the Acts of 1919 and 1935, but fundamentally, they wanted a government that was highly sensitive to public expectations and continuously accountable.
So they looked at the presidential system's concentration of power and essentially said, yeah, that's too risky for a new democracy.
Exactly. They recognize that the presidential executive puts way too much emphasis on one individual as the source of all executive power. The source material explicitly notes this danger. The framers wanted a strong executive, but they demanded strict safeguards. So they chose the parliamentary system because it contains built-in mechanisms to ensure the executive is constantly answerable to and controlled by the legislature.
That makes a lot of sense. The textbook actually quotes Jawaharlal Nehru from the Constituent Assembly debates. And it is such a revealing look into their mindset back then. He basically said they wanted a president with authority and dignity, someone who is a great figurehead, but, and this is the key phrase, a head that neither reigns nor governs.
Neither reigns nor governs. It is a brilliant tightrope to walk, really. A vast, diverse nation needs someone at the very top to symbolically represent the entire country, especially in moments of crisis.
Right, a unifying figure.
But you don't want them actually making the day-to-day partisan decisions. To ensure this, the Indian president is not elected directly by the people.
Because, I mean, if 100 million people vote for you directly, you aren't going to just sit quietly and cut ribbons. You are going to claim a mandate to rule.
That is the exact mechanism they wanted to avoid. Direct elections create competing mandates between the president and the prime minister. So the Indian president is elected indirectly. They're elected by the elected members of parliament and members of the legislative assemblies across all the states.
Okay.
Yeah, they use a really complex system of proportional representation with a single transferable vote. And their removal impeachment requires a special majority and can only be done on one single ground: violation of the Constitution.
Okay, I understand the logic. You plug the pipe of power at the presidency to stop a dictator from emerging. But let me play devil's advocate here for a second, drawing on a note from the margins of our source text.
Go for it.
If the parliamentary system is this foolproof shield against personality cults, how do we explain the actual reality of Indian history? Because India has had some incredibly strong, dominant, larger-than-life prime ministers. It feels almost like plugging a leak in one pipe, the presidency,
Yeah.
only for the water pressure to build up and violently burst out of another pipe, which is the prime minister's office.
Yeah, that tension perfectly highlights the limits of constitutional engineering. And the text actually acknowledges this reality. The Constitution provides the framework, right? The checks, the balances, the requirement of majority support in the Lok Sabha, which is the lower house of parliament.
Right.
But a framework is just a framework. If a prime minister secures a massive, completely unassailable majority in parliament, combined with immense personal popularity, they can effectively bypass many of those checks in practice, if not in strict law.
Because the system assumes the parliament will act as a check. But if the parliament is entirely devoted to the prime minister, the check just vanishes.
Exactly. which leads to the ultimate conclusion the source points to. No system is entirely foolproof against a personality cult. The ultimate vigilance doesn't rely on the parchment the Constitution is written on. It relies on the people and the legislature actively utilizing the tools they have been given.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
So if the prime minister is the one with the potential to amass all this power, it brings us perfectly to the tools the president actually does have. Because we just spent all this time painting the president as this powerless figurehead who neither reigns nor governs.
Right.
If they're just a rubber stamp, why even have the office? What happens when that water pipe bursts?
Well, let's look at the legal reality. Article 74 of the Indian Constitution is very clear on this. It states, "There shall be a council of ministers headed by the prime minister to aid and advise the president, who shall act in accordance with such advice."
Shall. That is a very strong word in legal terms.
Yeah.
That means the advice is completely binding. The president literally has to do what the prime minister says.
It is binding, but, and this is a big but, the Constitution also grants the president 3 highly significant hidden discretionary powers. These aren't powers they use every single day, but when they do, it changes the entire political landscape.
Okay, how does a figurehead have hidden powers? Walk us through the first one.
The first is the power to send advice back for reconsideration. The president has the constitutional right to be informed of all important matters. If the Council of Ministers sends a decision to the president and the president thinks there is a legal flaw or it is just fundamentally bad for the country, they can refuse to sign it initially and send it back, asking the council to reconsider.
Wait, but if the president just sends the advice back, what stops the council from just rubber stamping it a second time and forcing his hand? If they send the exact same advice back, the president must sign it.
Legally, yes, they must. But think about the political weight of that action. The head of state, who represents the entire nation and supposedly stands above partisan politics, publicly says, "I think this is a terrible idea, please think again." Yeah, that carries massive moral and political gravity. It creates a complete media firestorm. It forces the government to pause, defend their action to the public, and sometimes the political cost of forcing it through a second time is just way too high.
That makes total sense. It's like a speed bump, but a very loud, very public one. So what is the second discretionary loophole?
This one is activated by political chaos. Formally, the president appoints the prime minister. Now, if one party wins a clear majority in the elections, the president has absolutely no choice. They appoint the leader of that party. But what happens in a hung parliament where no single party or pre-existing coalition has a clear majority?
You'd have 2 or 3 different leaders showing up at the president's door, all claiming they have the numbers to form a government.
Exactly. And the source gives a striking example from 1998 to illustrate this. No single party secured a majority. The BJP and its allies were 21 seats short. Right. And the president at the time, K.R. Narayan, he didn't just hand over the keys to the kingdom to the largest single party. He used immense discretion. He forced the leader of the alliance, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, to furnish actual written documents from concerned political parties proving their support.
Wow, so he literally said, "Show me the receipts. I'm not just taking your word for it."
He demanded the receipts, and he didn't stop there. Once Vajpayee was sworn in, the president mandated that he had to secure a vote of confidence on the floor of the House within a strict 10-day window. In that window of ambiguity, when the political math is fractured, the president becomes the most powerful person in the country, deciding who actually gets the chance to prove their majority.
That is massive. Okay, so what's the third power?
Here's where it gets really interesting. The veto power. Every bill passed by Parliament has to go to the president and be signed into law. We know they can send it back for reconsideration, which is a limited veto, but there is a massive loophole in the text of the Constitution itself, isn't there?
A glaring loophole, yeah. Because the Constitution explicitly says the president can send a bill back for reconsideration. But crucially, it does not mention any time limit within which the president actually has to do so.
Exactly. It is known as the pocket veto.
It's the constitutional equivalent of leaving someone's text message on read indefinitely.
That's exactly what it is. The president just puts the bill in their pocket and ignores it. Because there is no time limit, the bill just sits in limbo forever.
The source outlines an incredible story about this from 1986. The Parliament passed the Indian Post Office Amendment Bill. It was hugely controversial because it allowed the government to intercept mail, which was seen as this massive threat to the freedom of the press.
Right, a huge deal.
So the government pushed it through Parliament and wanted it passed into law. But President Jani Zail Singh just didn't sign it. He didn't send it back. He didn't reject it. He literally just sat on it.
He waited them out. And it worked beautifully. His term ended, and the next president, Venkataraman, finally sent it back to Parliament for reconsideration. But by that time, it was 1989. The political winds had completely shifted, the government had changed, a new coalition was in power, and they had absolutely no interest in the bill. So they never brought it up again.
Unbelievable.
President Zail Singh silently killed a major piece of legislation simply by doing absolutely nothing.
That is staggering. A single person, supposedly a figurehead, taking down a law just by refusing to pick up a pen. But, that's the exception. In the normal course of events, the president is sitting in the background, which leaves a massive vacuum. Someone has to be making the actual highly combustible daily decisions.
Yeah.
Which brings us right to the prime minister.
Yes, the prime minister is the absolute core of the political executive. Nehru actually called the PM the linchpin of government. Without the prime minister, the Council of Ministers does not exist. Yeah, if a regular minister resigns or dies, the government just appoints a new minister. But if the prime minister resigns or dies, the entire Council of Ministers is instantly dissolved.
Wow, so the linchpin is pulled and the wheels fall off entirely. And the PM wields incredible structural power, right? They decide who gets what job, who is elevated to a cabinet minister, who is relegated to a minister of state. They allocate the portfolios.
They do, and the entire operation is bound by a vital concept called collective responsibility. The ministry functions as an executive committee of the parliament. They sink or swim together. It implies total solidarity.
So no rogue ministers.
Exactly. If a vote of no confidence is passed in the lower house against even a single minister, the entire council has to resign.
That forces an intense level of unity.
It means that if a minister fundamentally disagrees with a policy decision made by the cabinet, they really only have two choices: publicly accept and defend the policy, or resign from their post entirely. You cannot remain in the government and publicly oppose the government's stance.
Now, speaking of the Council of Ministers, the source text highlights the 91st Amendment Act of 2003. This amendment capped the size of the Council of Ministers at 15% of the total number of members in the Lok Sabha.
Yes, a very important reform.
But let me push back on the official reasoning for a second. The official line is all about efficiency. But wasn't that 15% cap really just a way to stop prime ministers from basically bribing members of parliament with fancy ministerial titles and perks just to keep shaky coalition governments alive?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of Indian politics at the time, your suspicion is entirely correct and the text validates it. Before 2003, there was absolutely no constitutional restriction on the size of the cabinet.
So you could just have as many as you wanted.
Pretty much. So if you were prime minister trying to hold together a really fragile coalition of 5 or 6 different regional parties, the easiest way to keep a rebellious parliamentarian happy was to literally invent a new ministry and make them a minister.
Congratulations, you're now the minister of extremely specific administrative tasks.
That's practically what happened. It led to jumbo cabinets. You had these massive, bloated, incredibly expensive governments that existed solely for political appeasement. The 15% cap forced discipline. But this brings up a crucial shift in the nature of the prime minister's power that the source material explores.
What kind of shift?
Well, for decades after independence, when a single party had a massive majority, the prime minister was functionally unassailable. Their power was absolute. But the era of coalition politics, starting in earnest around 1989, it fundamentally changed the job description.
Right, because how does the job change when you don't have an absolute majority?
The prime minister morphed from being an unquestioned dominant leader into a constant, desperate negotiator. When you rely on political allies to stay in power, you lose your absolute prerogatives.
Makes sense. You owe people favors.
Exactly. You can't just choose whoever you want as a minister. You have to accept the candidates your alliance partners demand. You can't just dictate policy. You have to compromise and negotiate every single legislative program. The immense authority of the office was severely eroded by the daily grinding realities of coalition math.
Okay, so the political executive, the PM, and the ministers, they are constantly navigating these treacherous political waters, formulating policies, trying not to let the coalition collapse. But let's be real for a second. The prime minister isn't the one actually going out and physically building a highway or knocking on doors to collect taxes or managing a local hospital.
No, they certainly are not. And that brings us to the most vast, complex, and largely unseen machinery of the state, the permanent executive, better known as the bureaucracy or the civil service.
The back end of the operating system, the people who actually keep the servers running while the programmers argue with each other.
That's a great way to put it. In a democracy, the elected politicians are in charge, theoretically, but the bureaucracy provides the trained, skilled, permanent workforce that actually assists in formulating the granular details of the policies and then goes out into the country to execute them on the ground.
Right.
And the Constitution makers were absolutely obsessed with making sure this machinery was nonpartisan and selected purely on merit.
Hence the Union Public Service Commission, the UPSC, which handles the incredibly rigorous recruitment process for the central government. And the text points out that while merit is the baseline, there are specific constitutional reservations built right into the system.
Yes, there are reservations for marginalized communities, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward classes, and more recently, economically weaker sections, as well as provisions for women.
But instead of just listing the categories, let's talk about the actual mechanism of what that achieves. It's not just a box-ticking exercise, is it?
Not at all. The goal is to ensure that the bureaucracy is not just technically efficient, but that it actually reflects the demographic reality of the society it is administering.
Right. Representation matters on the ground.
Think about it. If a civil servant is managing a rural district with a highly diverse population, the machinery of the state shouldn't look entirely alien to the people living there. Historical social inequalities shouldn't prevent representation in the actual day-to-day governance of the country.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, in your daily life?
Well, the text zeroes in on the All India services, specifically the IAS, the Indian Administrative Service, and the IPS, the Indian Police Service. These are the people you actually interact with if you need something done.
Exactly.
The district collector, who wields immense power over local infrastructure, law and order, public services in your area, that person is usually an IAS officer. But, I noticed a really strange structural paradox in the source text regarding how these officers are actually managed.
Oh, yeah. It is one of the most defining and persistent tensions in Indian federalism. Let's break this down because it's wild. An IAS, or IPS officer, is assigned to work for a specific state government. They manage the daily affairs of that state, working directly under the supervision of the local chief minister. But they are recruited and appointed by the central government in New Delhi.
Right.
And here's the kicker. Only the central government can take disciplinary action against them. The state cannot fire or severely discipline its own top administrative officers.
It is a truly remarkable setup.
Think about that from a workplace perspective. Imagine you work for a company. Your daily boss tells you what to do, supervises your work, relies on you completely. But your boss has absolutely no power to fire you or demote you. Only the HR department, located in a completely different city, working for a different boss, has that power. Doesn't that give the central government massive indirect leverage and control over the states?
It gives them enormous leverage. The original intent was to ensure a unifying, standardized thread of administration across the entire country, ensuring officers could act without fear of local political retribution. But in practice, it absolutely creates constant friction between the state and central governments, especially when they are run by opposing political parties.
And what about the friction between the bureaucracy and the average citizen?
Yeah.
Because the textbook doesn't shy away from this reality at all. It states clearly that people are often terrified of approaching a government officer, and that the bureaucracy is frequently experienced as an arrogant, insensitive machine that just ignores the demands of ordinary people.
It is a profound structural challenge. You have this massive administrative machine wielding immense power over daily life. How do you make it accountable? If it is completely independent and secure in its tenure, it risks becoming an insensitive beast that ignores the public. But on the flip side, if the elected politicians interfere too much in the name of accountability, the bureaucracy just becomes a pawn. It becomes an instrument for politicians to bypass the law, punish their political enemies, and reward their friends.
You are basically damned if you do, damned if you don't. You either have an arrogant bureaucrat or a corrupted one.
The source material suggests that finding the perfect balance is nearly impossible. But it does point to modern legal tools like the Right to Information Act as a way for citizens to force transparency. It gives you a lever to pull to make this permanent machinery just a little more responsive and accountable to the people they are actually supposed to serve.
It is fascinating how all these pieces fit together. We've really pulled back the curtain today. I mean, we started by looking at how different countries build their executive operating systems, balancing stability against accountability.
Yep.
We saw how India's historical fear of a personality cult led to the choice of a parliamentary system. We explored how a president who is supposedly a mere figurehead, actually harbors incredible hidden powers, like using a pocket veto to just silently stall legislation.
Right, leaving them on read.
Exactly. We looked at the Prime Minister, balancing on the precarious tightrope of coalition politics, bound by collective responsibility. And finally, we dove into the complex, sometimes insensitive, but absolutely vital web of the permanent bureaucracy that actually keeps the wheels of the state turning. Understanding these mechanics doesn't just help you memorize facts. It fundamentally changes how you view the gears of power when you watch the news tonight.
The machinery is definitely complex, but once you break down the incentives, it is entirely comprehensible. But looking at all of this, especially this core requirement of a permanent, politically neutral bureaucracy, this raises an important question, one that isn't explicitly answered in our text, but that naturally emerges from it.
Oh, I like where this is going. What is the question we are left with?
Well, we demand that the bureaucracy remain strictly permanent and absolutely politically neutral. They serve whichever government wins the election, right?
Right.
But think about the human element behind the machinery. What happens to the efficiency and the morale of these officers when a newly elected government comes to power and orders them to instantly dismantle and reverse a massive signature policy, a policy that those exact same bureaucrats just spent the last 5 years faithfully building, championing, and implementing for the previous government? I mean, how does a human being remain perfectly neutral while systematically undoing your own life's work?
Wow. That is a staggering thought. How do you just flip in your brain and destroy what you built? It really makes you rethink that steering wheel analogy we started with. We assume turning the wheel left means the car goes left. But we forget that the mechanism connecting the wheel to the tires is made entirely of people. And people, unlike machines, have memories, pride, and limits. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the machinery around you, and we will see you next time.